Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, February 15th. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda. Good morning.
Good morning. All is not calm in Gaza, and overnight strikes reportedly killed 8 Palestinians. They were in retaliation for gunmen attacking IDF soldiers in Gaza's north. We're going to hear about what's happening on the ground in Gaza, as well as Manny's trip out there last week. We're also going to hear about plans for a potential military operation in the future. And then we'll turn to a story in which IDF soldiers were caught betting on the market, according to classified intelligence. So all of this and more when we're back.
Hi, Paul Green. I'm also a journalist with the Jewish Inquirer.
Okay, massive.
It's the 4th largest UK Jewish publication in the UK.
4th.
In the UK.
Hello.
Hello.
Is this our genius reporter who was beaten by a blindfold killer?
Let's getting out.
Yes, what do you want?
It's April Fool's Day next week, and I wanted to come up with a totally ridiculous story.
Well, why don't you just publish what you normally do?
What do you mean?
Wow.
I am Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, let's talk about the attack on IDF soldiers that occurred yesterday, which was followed by retaliatory strikes. What happened on the ground?
So, in an incident in North Gaza in the Bet Hanun area, we saw, and footage that the army also published, at least 5 gunmen basically approaching troops on the Israeli side of the ceasefire line. According to the IDF, they had emerged from a tunnel and then had entered a sort of damaged, half-destroyed building. And you can see in the video very clearly these gunmen approaching Israeli forces. The area is around a kilometer over the yellow line, so well deep within the IDF-held territory. The army then conducted a strike on the building. They say that at least 2 of the gunmen were killed in the strike. They're still searching the area. They think the other 3 were also killed, but they need to verify this on the ground. And then in response, of course, because this incident is a violation of the ceasefire, the Israeli Air Force conducted at least 2 strikes overnight. The army hasn't commented yet on what it had targeted, but according to Palestinian media, these strikes killed at least 8 Palestinians. 1 strike in the Jabalia area in North Gaza, 1 strike in Khan Yunis in South Gaza. But like in previous cases of Hamas gunmen attacking troops or other violations of the ceasefire, we've seen the military conduct strikes against Hamas operatives, against sometimes allied terror groups as well, infrastructure as well. So we'll find out probably later today what exactly the army had targeted, and perhaps even there might be more further responses as well to this incident.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Manny, but 2 things seem unusual to me in this particular incident. One, that it was a kilometer over the yellow line, which is obviously, as you said, no mistake. And the other, that it was in the north. Have we not mostly seen gunmen popping up from tunnels in the south of Gaza?
So there's sort of 2 different things. In the south, there's an area in East Rafah where there are gunmen who are believed to be sort of trapped there on the Israeli side of the ceasefire line. Whereas elsewhere in Gaza, I mean, all of the IDF-held areas, there's still many, many tunnels that exist. The armies, they estimate they've maybe gotten to about 50-60% of the tunnels. And even so, I think those numbers are not particularly accurate because they don't know what they haven't found yet, of course. But it's important to say that in the IDF-held areas, there are plenty of tunnels and tunnels that cross the yellow line as well. So it's entirely possible that these gunmen entered a tunnel on the Hamas side and then popped up on the Israeli side of the line and then tried to launch an attack on troops, or tries to reach a building where there's weapons to try and retrieve them, all sorts of cases. So we do see these sort of incidents often, but I think what is unusual in this case is that it was a pretty large group this time. Normally we see 1 or 2 operatives crossing the yellow line and trying to attack troops or trying to reach a specific area. This was a lot more organized, and in the footage you can see these gunmen sort of covered in blankets and carpets to try and conceal the weapons that they're hiding. So again, no mistake in this case, but it's a challenge that the army has to deal with, and that's something I also saw when I was in Gaza last week is the fact that there are many, many tunnels still in the areas that the army controls.
We are going to talk about what you saw when you're in Gaza, but one more question on these tunnels. And of course, the IDF has been since October and, of course, previously demolishing these tunnels. But we're hearing reports now that some of the Gazan militias are also aiding in this fight. Can you tell us anything about this?
Yeah, so it's something that we couldn't really previously report, but it's now being acknowledged by one of these militias themselves, the Popular Forces that led formerly by Yasser Abu Shabab, who was killed last year, and his deputy's now taken over. And his deputy wrote in a Facebook post just last week that they are involved in demolishing the tunnels. He admitted this. He posted a picture showing members of the militia in the Rafah area with oxygen masks at the entrance to a tunnel. So they've sort of been outsourced by the army, allegedly, of course, in the areas that these militias control to locate, to scan, to potentially also demolish the tunnels. It's, of course, Israel's acknowledged providing them with equipment and intelligence and other support, food as well, and also evacuating their wounded members to Israel for medical treatment in certain cases. But it seems like Israel's also providing them with equipment to deal with the tunnels as well. And they say, this group says that that they're working on demolishing the tunnels, and they're sort of the alternative to Hamas in those areas. There's quite a few militias in Gaza that Israel has provided backing to, but the Popular Forces led by Yasser Abu Shabab is probably the largest one in the IDF-held areas of Gaza.
And when you say outsource, you didn't mean that the entire project is now in the hands of the militias, meaning it's more like a supplementary force to what the IDF soldiers themselves are doing, correct, Manny?
Correct, yeah. I mean, the army is still working day and night to demolish these tunnels. It's an endless task, as some soldiers have told me. It really is almost a bottomless pit, literally even, with the amount of tunnels there are. So in areas that these militias are operating in, they're working in those areas to demolish the tunnels that they find. But in the areas the IDF is deployed in, of course, it's working on it itself.
Okay, so let's put you on the map in your trip into Gaza last week, and you're in Shajaiya. So where are we on the map, Manny?
So that's in eastern Gaza City. It's in the Strip's north, sort of just on the edge of Gaza City, the closer to the Israeli border. We weren't on the yellow line. We were at an IDF post that is sort of looks towards the yellow line, but the IDF operates right up to the yellow line, and that's where most of these, I would say, clashes or incidents of terror operatives crossing the line and attacking troops or encountering troops occur, less so at the outpost. So the outpost was, I would say, relatively laid back and calm, nothing really going on. But the soldiers there are sort of ready and prepared for incidents like this, like the one we saw in Bet Hanun, which is just slightly north of where we were. But the main sort of, I would say, the challenge or the thing they're most worried about is the tunnels in the area. There are so many tunnels still, and these Hamas operatives could pop up from these tunnels. They could launch an attack, but that's why they're deployed to these posts. That's why they also carry out ambushes. They send troops deeper into the yellow line area, and wait for instance where Hamas operatives try to approach the Israeli forces, or try to reach a weapons site that Israel knows about, or try to reach a tunnel. And then, of course, the army will ambush them and prevent them from doing so. And it's sort of multiple sort of layers to it. So the idea is, of course, to prevent any infiltration into Israeli territory. So when you have troops deployed to the yellow line, to these outposts, to the border, nobody is really going to get through and reach Israeli territory. But of course, with the risk of all these tunnels, they could be popping up anywhere. They could be popping up closer to the border. It's definitely something that the army is aware of and working to sort of locate all of these tunnels.
Right. In the area controlled by Israel, it sounds to me that the operations that the IDF are right now doing are far and beyond more than what any kind of international security force would be expected to do. Meaning it's not just patrolling, it's not just surveillance. There's actual operations going on all the time. Is that right, Manny?
Yeah, all the time. It's not something that I think Israel can expect anyone else to do. And I think for that reason, I don't think we're going to see Israel withdraw from those areas anytime soon, not unless it's very sure that it's dealt with the tunnel networks in those areas.
Right. And so, as such, we've heard and we've talked about on the podcast already that there are plans for some kind of ground operation into the Gazan controlled areas as well. How realistic do you think these plans are? I mean, it's so hard to tell what's going to happen, but what are you hearing from the army?
So from what I understand is that the Southern Command has put together plans for a renewed offensive in Gaza aimed at disarming Hamas. And the reason why these plans were put together is because, at least in the military and security officials, they don't believe that Hamas will disarm willingly. They don't think that it will put down its weapons, and they're right because Hamas says it won't put down its weapons. It's publicly said so, that it doesn't plan to give up its arms, and therefore the army's put together these plans. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir said on Friday that the military will not give up on the plan to disarm Hamas, and he said that they have plans ready to go if needed and if the government orders to. And I think that's the main sort of caveat here is that the army can have all these plans ready, it can have various options that it will present to the government, but the government needs to order it to actually carry out such an offensive. And that's a huge question because we don't know if the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, will approve of this because, of course, they backs the ceasefire. They're the ones who sort of made it go ahead to begin with. So there's a lot of questions out there right now whether or not Israel could launch such a new offensive against Hamas aimed at disarming it. But the army's plans are ready to go if required. So I don't know how to say if it's realistic or not, but I think we are approaching a point where Israel will be telling the US and telling the other mediators that Hamas isn't disarming and we need to move ahead with the next stages of this peace plan that Trump has laid out. So it's possible that we'll see a renewed offensive or threats of a new offensive or something, starting something. But I'm not exactly sure when it will happen, but I think we are approaching sort of a point where we're going to be moving towards a different stage in the ceasefire deal.
And in the meantime, of course, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of soldiers deployed in Gaza, and of course, more tens of thousands of reservists who are still actively deployed. But Manny, you have an update about the status of reservists and the expectations from them. So what did you hear about this?
So the army is working around a bit of a difficult situation here where the government has ordered it to cut back on reservist forces. It has gotten expensive. After over 2 years of war, constantly calling up reservists costs the country a lot of money. And mainly the main economic impact is the fact that reservists are not in the regular workforce, in the civilian workforce. They're in the army and they're being paid anyway. So there's a big economic impact, and it's not something anyone can really deny. But
Just push pause on that for 1 second, just to chime in. I mean, I have three children who are soldiers in the army, and they make in the neighborhood of around 2,000, 2,500 a month for their service, of course, which is mandatory. Whereas somebody who is in high tech, who is being called up by the army, could be making, is it even capped? It could be 40,000 shekels a month from the army, right?
it's basically you get paid your regular salary, but you're not doing work for your company that you work for, meaning your job will pay you your money that you're not your regular salary while you're in reserve duty, essentially. So just to put it in perspective, the direct cost of war has been estimated at 220 billion shekel, of which around 50 to 70 billion has just been on the reservists to pay them for their time in reserve duty. Just to put the numbers into perspective.
Very
So
clear.
yeah, so
Yeah.
the government, mainly Defense Minister Israel Katz and Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, they agreed as part of the state budget for the next year to reduce the number of reserve forces serving on any given day from 60,000 down to 40,000. So they really want to cut it back. And the army needs to make do with this. They can't argue with that. That's the budget. That's what they've been given. So to cut back, what the army is doing is they will be calling up reservists for less time now. But has angered some, and I'll sort of explain why. Normally, when you're called up for reserve duty, you do a certain amount of time during operational activity, meaning actual IDF operations, and then there's a certain amount of time for R&R, for organization, for training purposes, for getting yourself together. So the army is cutting back on that amount of time. So reservists will only do, I think it's now 55 days in total instead of 72, of which 42 of those days are operational activity, and the rest is the resting and the organization and the training days. So there is definitely a cut in the amount of time that they are resting and not doing actual IDF operations. But overall, the time that they serve in reserve duty will be less. The army is also doing a few other adjustments to try and get people back into the workforce and not stay in reserve duty, because unfortunately, I mean, as much as, it's great that reservists want to come and serve, a lot of reservists are coming to serve and sort of, I would say, taking a little bit advantage of the system and of the war and the fact that they can be in reserve duty to just constantly serve in reserve duty. So there's been a few, I would say, phenomenons of soldiers moving between units. So they finish their reserve duty in one unit and then they get moved over to another unit and continue serving. That's where you get soldiers who have been in reserve duty for 400, 500, even 700 days. The army wants to stop that sort of phenomenon, so reservists can't be moved around between units without proper oversight and proper approvals. And another way to do this is the fact that various benefits that reservists normally get for being in reserve duty, they've sort of capped it at 45 days. So if you've served 45 days in reserve duty, you get those benefits. There's no real incentive to continue serving beyond that time. And that will hopefully get people to go back to their civilian jobs and not stay in reserve duty. The army is also cutting back on other roles it sees as not super necessary right now, like reservists who are full-time reservists are bolstering civilian defense squads. Like you mentioned, there's tens of thousands of troops in Gaza, more even on the border itself. You don't need additional reservists to serve in the security defense squad of a community on the border as well, in addition to all the troops that are in Gaza. So they're cutting back on those roles and other sort of headquarter roles that are not necessary, because there's no fighting right now in Gaza, or really any fighting on other fronts. But of course, all this can change. If there's a major operation, then they'll have to call everybody up again, and they will break all the promises that they've made on how long the reservists will serve. But under at least the plan, according to the budget that they've been given, that's how they're trying to reduce it and get people back into the civilian workforce.
Let's go to a short break.
You're essentially, I think, the only opposition leader who says clearly, yes, after the elections, we should form a coalition together with Arab parties like Ra'am. Other opposition leaders say explicitly that this won't happen. Their argument is that after October 7th, it's just impossible to form a coalition with a non-Zionist Arab party. Could you explain your position?
I think that we must replace the current coalition, the current government, as soon as possible. If in order to get the 61 mandates which are needed to forge a new coalition, so what's the problem sitting with Mansour Abbas? Mansour Abbas is a leader that totally accepted the following principle. Israel is a Jewish state and at the same time free, democratic and egalitarian state. So I have no problem to sit with him. If you accept, the very basic nature of Israel, I can understand, the method or, the policy of Lieberman or Bennett. All right, they want to bring, more and more voters from the right. All right, I can understand it.
You need that
I do
in
not
order to
accept
win.
it, but I can understand it. But I truly don't understand why Eisenkot and Lapid refuse to accept, my own very natural, very simple principle. All right, we must replace this government. And I just wonder, let's assume that we get, alone, without an Arab party, only 58 mandates. So what is next? Are we willing to launch another, election campaign, or we are willing to forge a new government? I think that the second choice is much better.
We're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, of course, the idea that there could be a strike on Iran is very much still in the air. And if that were to happen, Israel is prepared to I don't know, absorb any of the retaliatory strikes from Iran. And one of those ways that was discovered in the June war was the David's Sling ballistic anti-missile force. So correct me on the actual proper name of it, first of all, and explain to us what it is.
So David Sling is Israel's medium tier air defense system. It was initially probably designed for long range or medium range rockets, drones, UAVs, and other targets. We're talking about the ranges of, I think, up to around 300 kilometers. So it was primarily used during the war as well for long-range Hamas rockets, so rockets that Hamas would launch from Gaza at Tel Aviv or further north, rockets that Hezbollah would launch from Lebanon at central Israel. We're talking those kind of ranges. But because of the rounds we had with Iran and the sort of the very expensive nature of using the Arrow system, the long-range system that intercepts ballistic missiles, they began to work on trying to use it as well for ballistic missiles, even though it's definitely not designed for that. Of course, Iran's ballistic missiles were launched from 1,500 kilometers away. It's really not meant for this, but there were successes during the June war with the David Sling managing to intercept these long-range ballistic missiles. And recently, the Defense Ministry and the company that produces it, Rafael, conducted a series of tests, basically preparing it for all these future possible threats and upgrading the system so it can deal with different threats, not just the drones and the medium-range rockets. And they say these tests were successful, and it will basically help prepare it for whatever future threats are likely to come. And I think it's quite a big deal that Israel has these, not just these long-range systems that can deal with the ballistic missiles, but also these medium-range ones as well. Of course, just to for the context, at the end of the multi-tiered air defense sort of array is the Iron Dome and Iron Beam that deal with short-range rockets, and the Iron Beam, which is the laser-based system, which also deals with drones and stuff. Those aren't going to be dealing with ballistic missiles, of course, but we are seeing now that even the medium range can be dealing with these more distant threats.
And in terms of the cost breakdown, I think you started to get into it, but the Arrow, the Heights, is what, $2+ million a pop, and the David Sling is about half that, and the Iron Beam is like peanuts, right? As far as the tiers go.
Yeah, so the Arrow 3 can go for 2.5, even 3 million, depending on what the exchange rate is now. Each use, which is very, very expensive. The David Sling is estimated at around $1 million, and the Iron Dome is a few tens of thousands per shot, and then the Iron Beam is essentially free as long as you have electricity, and the cost is very, very minimal. But the Iron Beam is not dealing with ballistic missiles, and I don't think the technology is close to dealing with that yet. But it is quite a significant factor if Israel can rely more on cheaper options to deal with Iranian ballistic missiles, should there ever be another round with Iran. Economically, I think it's a big impact.
As we say, tfu, so we shouldn't know about this, right, Manny?
Exactly.
But for our final segment, let's turn to a very concerning story in which Israeli soldiers are using classified information to bet on a betting site called Polymarket. So, Manny, I am old and I don't even know what this is essentially. So, tell us first of all, what is this betting site?
So Polymarket is it's a website that's been around for a while. It essentially is a gambling site, although it doesn't advertise it as such, where you can bet on events. So you can bet on pretty much anything. It's you can bet on sporting events, which team will win. You can bet on random things like how many tweets will Trump post this month, and you can also bet on world news events like will Israel strike in Iran on Friday the 12th of June. And that's essentially what happened in this case. There was a user that made some suspiciously accurate bets ahead of the war with Iran in June. Things like will Israel strike on this day? Will Israel strike by the end of this month? And they put down tens of thousands of dollars, and they made around $150,000 in profit, according to the user's page. The Israeli defense establishment began looking into it. There was an investigation by the Shin Bet, the defense ministry, the police. The army was, of course, also involved to find out perhaps if this is someone with insider information that made, 5 correct bets all in a row, something that no one else would have really known. The authorities announced last week that a civilian and a reservist have been indicted for using classified information that they were exposed to. The reservist, of course, as part of his role in the military, in order to place bets on Polymarket regarding military operations. They didn't specify which, although I think it's quite clear as to which ones we're talking about. Several other reservists were also questioned in the case. We don't know yet if indictments will be filed against them as well. It depends if they can, of course, prove that they used the classified information to place these bets. But right now, these reservists will be charged with security offenses, obstruction of justice, bribery as well. The full indictments and the full case are still under wraps, under a court-issued gag order, because of the sensitive nature of the case. But it's the army is now saying that this is a very severe event, and it's working on trying to prevent this from ever occurring again. But it's essentially, for anyone thinking about it, it's basically insider trading. These soldiers used information that they knew about, not to buy stocks on the stock market, but to place a bet, which they knew the outcome of, or they knew likely what the outcome would be, in order to basically make money. The main risk here is, of course, if Iran is looking at these betting sites and they see a user suddenly making a bet, or if they track a user that's been making correct bets, and then they're going to know, what the Israeli military is planning. So that's the main risk here, that it could expose sensitive information. The army says that nothing was harmed by these bets. There was no, damage to anything operational, but still, it's a huge risk that the army now needs to put a stop to prevent it from happening again.
I know there's a gag order on the details, but do you know what kind of echelon the reservist was in? Meaning, how high up did this go?
No, we don't know those details. That's currently under the gag order. We don't know their names or what positions they held, or really anything right now.
All right, Manny, it's a terrible story to hear, definitely, but thank you for bringing it to light for us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by Ari Schlacht. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.